And we're live. Hi everyone, I'm Airier, coming here from the place that seems to have all the tech issues because I forgot to burn incense to the Holy Machine Spirit. Joking aside, it wasn't even my fault this time because the frickin' power decided it didn't need to be on for a minute, and that is a problem. Love that! Someone's doing yard work outside. I don't know where. They hit something. They do this frequently. I'm annoyed. So there's always a good chance, more than 0%, that this stream will end when the power goes out again. I really like that. More importantly, joking aside, we're going to jump in and see if we can do this before that happens, which is not entirely up to me, and see how far we can get before that does happen. More importantly, it's the Star Wars with Warhammer 40k, Episode 40, Mortal Pinnacle Part 4 by Warhammer fan. Wow. A fan with too much time, who is in the chat and says Vashtor is displeased. I don't know. Vashtor likes breaking shit on other people. Whereas at the orcs, it's kind of both. Whatever. More importantly, we're going to jump right in. And if I happen to ignore chat, it's because I have a habit of spamming random things that are spoilers. And then I still look, even though I say I'm going to ignore it. Yeah, one of these days I'll listen to myself, and then I'll wake up and realize, nah, that's just a dream. I don't do that. Let's get started. All right. Think everything's good. I started on the desktop recording rather than the face cam. Oh, well, doesn't matter. Starting up new. Also, I don't need to say that right now because we're live the entire time. I say that for every video. It's why whenever I happen to not cut it out, you always hear me say the very embarrassing. Yeah. Cough, cough. Starting now. Also, the coughing is necessary. It's a good luck cough. If you don't do it, what are you? You're some kind of monster? Speaking of. Good luck? Yeah, good luck cough. Wow, I can't speak today. Good luck cough accomplished. Star Wars vs. Warhammer 40k. How could have not unmuted?
Booming man. Lower.
What the what? I don't... That was weird. I got a picture. Oh, because YouTube has this thing where it auto readjusts where you think you're at, and because I took the thumbnail from that area. Funny thing about headphones, I can take them off and just take an image without any context. So that happened. I love it when that does happen. Mortal Pinnacle, Part 4. I'm trying to cut around because I don't like using
How
music.
did all this happen? This is way more than the other simulations
right?
gave us for the holding maneuver.
The young clone said.
Yeah, because they thought it was a simulation. I actually forgot that, even though people were reminding me. Okay. Yeah, that could be a problem. Ooh.
As she stood within the holographic sphere, her large fleet and all of its information splayed out before and around her. 2 of the 3 mandators are completely totaled. And the holding fleet...
The third one's still good.
It's more like a holding squad now.
Yeah.
She added.
Reports are still coming in. I'm sorting through them as quickly as I can, but yeah, it looks like a lot happened in those 20 minutes, said Arcanian.
This has only been 20 minutes. I mean, I know battles move fast, but multiple episodes have been encapsulated, at least in this space section, in 20 minutes. God damn, fan.
A clone named after the odd method of his production. He and his brothers had arrived only a week or 2 before Omega had begun her specialized preparations for this very battle. They were looked down upon, and though she hated to admit it, she almost agreed with the natural resentment that the original clones projected towards the Sparties, as they were at times known. They were only about a year old, and each of them, Arcanian included, were fully grown. And it wasn't just that. The new clones that had suddenly arrived for advanced training were like bad clone stereotypes. And the Kaminoans could...
Okay, I need to ask, what does that mean, a bad clone stereotype? Because a lot of the clones were kind of doing that intentionally, because that's where we got the joke for, including their naming. Or are these ones acting more like droids? We'll figure it out as it goes. This is probably a group of people who are actually in Clone Wars or one of the other series afterwards. I just don't know, because I'm so far behind.
barely stand the sight of them. They all had the same memories, and they all seemed almost like flesh droids rather than proper clones, performing their duties in a belligerent fog that made them prone to aggressively acting out.
Oh, so they're basically bank tellers. Got it.
Well, almost all. Arcanian was the single exception, a mutant not unlike Omega. He did not
Psyker?
need any alterations or additions to fit into his station thanks to his adult size, but unlike the others, an abnormality in his brain had caused him to receive only the most basic aspects of his flash-pumped auto-training. The results
And Fan mentioned in the chat that these are the clones who were basically flash cloned and memory pumped in, so psycho indoctrination 40k terms, without any actual training. So it's a bunch of newbies with a lot of book smarts. If you've ever done a job, someone who's only read the manual, it doesn't matter which job you're thinking right now, you know the one. It helps that you read the manual. Most people don't do that. But also, if that's the only thing you've done, yeah.
were a perceptive and intelligent, if untrained clone who barely knew how to fire a blaster, but quickly absorbed concepts of strategy and statistics.
Oh, see, that last part is the biggest recommendation I've ever heard for anyone. Being able to quickly absorb information is a skill in its own set that I definitely don't have, but it's very impressive.
He was also highly aggressive, acting as the fuel to their team's fire more often than not.
Yeah.
Ark, are these right?
Wait, they have an entire team of clones with an aggressive guy who's really good at tactics and picks them up easily, surrounded by a bunch of people who are really good at acting like droids. Why does that sound like a comedy series? I don't... Oh god, it actually sounds more like Comedy Code Geass.
Sprout asked, the clone child nestled into an alcove over Omega's right shoulder. 8% is all they made it out with? After we allocated 2 whole mandators? The clone asked incredulously, the more matured clone nodding from his station across from Sprout nearer to the floor. Yeah, and that's not all, said the clone named Ally, whose control station was situated above Omega's left shoulder. These readings are unmistakable. Some kind of massive explosion or weapons discharge did this.
Or the flare
the
gun. The
young strategist gasped.
Essentially just a giant solar flare.
Omega snapped her fingers. Right, if this is all from some weapon, then our next step is to find it. Meek, get on those energy readings. Ally, sort through the comm traffic for ideas as to what is happening.
Ooh. And I can see why Omega's not the one reading off these orders, because while on the one hand, probably a good idea. On the other hand, if they... Omega's the only one who doesn't know that's a game. Or it's not a game, huh? No, because they mentioned simulation in the beginning, so she's not the only one being Ender's gamed here. Okay. I thought everyone else would be aware and she wasn't, but she might be figuring it out because she's apparently smart enough, I've been told. But figuring out where the weapon came from wouldn't actually be a problem if you could just get any of that information back from any of the surviving members, because they would see, oh yeah, this is where Blast originated at. Hell, they could probably just see that on a tactical chart by looking at where the damage started at. Well, maybe. Depends on how good their damage charts are and how much the ship spun around when it did damage. That might disguise where its location is, even if it does or does not move.
Arcanian, send out battle report requests and collate what I can use. Then send it directly into my displays. Sprout, I want you sending me every technical analysis you can, no matter what it is. If it goes to your head, I want to know about it. She said, stretching, cracking her fingers and extending out her hands, the globe of info spinning around her, altering as she initiated its direct command mode. With that final initiation, she opened her eyes onto a scene of stellar war. Becoming the ephemeral will behind her fleet, the omnipresent spirit of their fight, their invisible goddess, each ship dancing at the flick of her wrists. And flick she did.
Yeah, she definitely hasn't figured it out yet. Because if she knew that she was directing people, that comparison would probably be a lot more, oh god, as opposed to, haha, power. Yeah.
Sweeping her arms out, the wide wings of her armada splaying out and then in, beginning to surround the Imperial fleet. But the Imperials were not a static foe, reacting like multiple hives of enraged insects. New swarms of strike craft spilling into metallic clouds from the hangars of their cathedral homes. Omega could feel them.
Okay, this is more of a writing comment. 1, coolness. 2, saying as a metaphor that they're not a hive, and then immediately using the word swarm, which would be a reference to insects which are commonly associated with hives. This is just me being nitpicky as an English major. This is one of those things where I would have changed the wording of hive, because I get it, they're not acting like a swarm. They're not acting like a hive or competing hives. They're acting like a swarm, which is... I get what you mean, and a swarm is the exact right word for what you're doing, but it also completely negates the metaphor where you were using. Something else would be like a wave or a tide. Those would be good waves that show, well, good words that show a big cluster moving in unison, which is still technically a swarm as the best word for it, but just not in this case because of the metaphor you set up. It's a minor nitpick. It's not important, but it's just one of those things that kind of hits me. It's like, oh, maybe not the best.
The new biting torrents of smaller ships, stinging with a disturbing effectiveness.
Or did you say they were like a hive?
The new hangars of the new swarm reacting like multiple hives. But the Imperials were not a static foe, reacting like multiple hives of it.
What was the exact phrasing there? The Imperials were not a static foe, reacting like multiple hives and radiant insects. No, I understood that correctly. I thought maybe I wasn't, because the entire thing was focusing on how they were acting like hives with multiple word usages after the word swarm. But then they are doing it here where the comma would imply based... He meant to say that they are acting like multiple hives of enraged insects, but when he put the negative at the beginning of "but the Imperials were not a static foe," he meant that as an exclusive, not an inclusive. Oh. Because when you have the period there, this is a modification for reacting like multiple hives or vice versa. So what he's saying, what he meant is they are not static, they're acting like hives, as opposed to they are acting like hives, so they're not static. Or because they're not static, I get what he's meaning here. Okay, it's a small little thing right here. It's not a big deal, fan. I get what you meant. Honestly, this is the kind of minor thing. If you literally just took out the comma, it might fix it on a read-through, but it's not a big deal. It's literally just me being pedantic.
Enraged, the new biting torrents of smaller ships, stinging with a disturbing effectiveness into the outermost forces of her fleet, which she directed to engage and intercept them. The impish clone smiled as she released swarms of her own, enough to match and ultimately even outnumber those put out by the Imperial vessels, the bulk of the two waves meeting between their forces, before the battle line was dragged up close to her. Right away, Omega could see why, watching as the enormous engines of the many enemy vessels roared to life, a sizable portion of them launching themselves with growing speed toward the heart of her own formation. More information poured in through her interfaces, revealing purple and green splashes of color, like fluorescent fogs and slim trailing nebulas lingering over the places where the fighting had been thickest.
Oh, I love this. Fan is doing something that normally he and a lot of other people would just leave to an image in the background of just a random tactical display to give people an idea of what they're talking about. But I just want to listen to this again. The way he's describing the movement and understanding what's going on, but only through seeing what's on the display. So we're getting a lot of information about the display, centering us in the location Omega's at, while also getting the important information for what the battle at large is doing.
Interfaces, revealing purple and green splashes of color, like fluorescent fogs and slim trailing nebulas lingering over the places where the fighting had been thickest.
And you can just imagine...
At first...
It almost... I don't know, for some reason, expecting a sphere, because it's 3D, and you just see the booms where things are going off and the information's becoming desynced, or showing a little visual reminder that things are bad there. Yes, IR worked well.
It all seemed meaninglessly intermingled. But then, she saw a trail leading away, and saw by the streams which composed it, and the damaged vessel which it all led to, that this had been the vessel which had borne the insane weapon they had fired
And she figured it out without
before.
having to waste anyone else's
More
time.
information communicates in vid feeds of the discharge and reports of the heroic actions which had been taken to neutralize it. Omega absorbed it all quickly and dismissed the weapon from her mind.
Because she knows it's
Crippled and
damaged.
running, it was no longer a primary threat and could not match what now demanded her attention: the Imperial countercharge and division of forces.
And just on a more practical note, not something Fan made a mistake on, because at this point it's just fine. He's doing exactly what he needs to by having the smart character recognize the limping ship with big gun isn't threat. It's also kind of cool to note that if they're being helped away, that means more forces from the Imperium side would be pulled away to help the ship so it doesn't get destroyed, but also so they don't lose any forces around it. How to rephrase that? Basically, they're taking extra forces that normally the Star Wars side would have to fight and removing them from the field willingly on their own side. So, yeah, it's just kind of cool.
The last thing
And the
she
smart
did
character's the
before
one getting
fully
it, while the
focusing
dumb
on the
characters were asking
adversaries
everywhere.
before her was to confirm safety for their planetary support strike force.
Oh, and Marius, you think that's a mistake ignoring it? Long term, maybe. If they ignore it long term, that's a problem. In the immediate term where they do not have the advantage, where they are actively stretched too thin, and the beginning of this chapter showed that they are losing, I think it's a good idea. Well, it's a good short-term goal because they might not be able to survive to the long term without making it past the short term. If they were in a better position, if they were holding their own or even just matching, it might be worth it to get rid of the long-term problem. But that's a completely different thing about tactics that Fan may or may not be going into and may or may not become relevant. I hope it does because it's a really cool ship, man.
Sending the signal with a twitch of her fingers and ensuring that the planet of Axum would soon host a great deal more Republic forces. Sprout's tactical know-how filtered in as suggestions and remarks, his mind second only to Omega's own. Countercharge? Seems insane.
Yeah.
Was his first message, which was quickly followed by a second. Forcing a pincer? Was the next. Omega's eyes swept over the field, and she nodded to herself, agreeing more and more with his assessment as she watched the ragged Imperial line taking two distinct actions in opposite.
And this is a very important part about writing an intelligent character. I'm mostly just thinking about this right now because I've had to listen to so many reminders from overly sarcastic productions about characters who are magical geniuses, where they just have the answer, but they're actually idiots. Because they only have the answer you need, and that's about it, and they can't actually figure it out, and they can't show it either, because that would be the author having to be as smart as the character is portrayed, and that can't happen. What Fan is doing right now is very important to show Omega's character. I don't know if this is something that happened, not this fight, but these types of events were similar to her character arc, I think at the Bad Batch, because I haven't got that far yet. But what he's doing is, she's showing the dumb character, or the comparatively less smart character in the Flash clones. There's a word for them, but I'm not going to say it correctly, so I'm not going to try. Unlike every other word I say incorrectly, and I just do it anyways. Where they are like, ooh, we need to find that weapon. It's an amazing thing that we need to find right now. We need to ask people about it. We need to go and bother the people who are trying not to die from death weapon and ask them to tell us where is Big Gun. As opposed to, we already have that information, is what exactly happened with Omega. She figured it out immediately, knew that it wasn't a threat because it's already limping, so it's probably not going to fire. It's being dragged away, so it can't move under its own power, or it's being escorted away, which means it can't defend itself. It is not the threat at the moment. So she's already figured that out just with the information she already had. And having that mental realization, showing the steps, is important. And then her accepting help shows that she's not going, I am the greatest OC ever, don't steal. Which, admittedly, she wouldn't be an OC, be a Star Wars character. But it's always good to have that. Fan doesn't usually fall into that trap, but having the reminder by characters actually acting smart is good. As opposed to Palpatine, where he acts dumb, because a lot of the time I'm honestly convinced that they're starting to write him more as an adrenaline junkie who intentionally makes mistakes because he likes living on the edge of it, about to fail. Personal opinion.
They wanted to break through her line, get behind them, and then hold them down while their other ships distanced themselves and lined up shots to ensure damage from both sides. A bold plan, and one which depended entirely on their first charging fleet successfully holding and engaging their attention. Ooh. A plan she intended to deny.
Oh?
She opened her hands, flicking her fingers as screens and options appeared.
A plan she intended to deny? But it almost sounded like she was going along with it. She's probably just thinking something else then. Maybe a better idea.
Charging us straight through. She sent to Sprout and the others. Do it. I see the goal. It is right before us. Sent Arcanian. High losses guaranteed. Are you sure about this? Sent Ally.
And when Fan is talking in the Flash clone's voices, he has a very monotone voice, highlighting the more droid-like clone version of them.
High losses guaranteed regardless. Sent Meek. Meek is correct. It's not a question of losing ships, it's a question of winning the game. Sent Sprout.
And they think
Omega,
it's a game still.
we are with you. What's the plan? Sprout followed up, and the communications went still. Omega took a steadying breath, smiled, and nodded. Meek, you will take command of battle groups V1, 2, 3, and the 9th, 3rd, and 4th. You are to directly attack the incoming charge, obfuscate our tactic. Make them think we are engaging. Arcanian, you take
it's a feint, or
V4,
feint.
5, and 6, and move to flank the charging imps or pursue them, depending on how effective Meek is at stopping them. Your goal will be to distract and hold them while Ally, Sprout, and I crush their range support. Omega transmitted to them through her displays. We can't promise you any more than time, and I'm not even sure how much, but we will do our best. Sent Arcanian. This may use up the entire victory fleet. Sent Meek. It's just a simulation, and they aren't grading us based on how many ships we keep. What's our part in this, Omega?
Yeah, I was assuming they all thought it was still a simulation still, and yeah. Depending on her reaction, we'll tell if she actually knows it's a simulation or if she's managed to figure it out. Because that comment is one of those that the comment itself is like, okay, they still think it's a simulation, but anyone reacting to it differently would be at the level of, what the fuck is wrong with you? The answer is they don't actually know. If she acts any differently, then she's figured it out. Let's see how Fan's going to play this.
Sent Sprout. You will take the entire 7th Fleet, and
Not
Ally,
reacting
you
so
will
far.
take the whole 5th. Both of you need to join me as we charge directly through their initial advance.
So far,
and
so
then,
good.
once
Not
we
reacting.
are clear, spread out and curve to either side. I will take the entire Circle Armada and everything else we have not committed and adjust our speed in accordance with your envelopment.
So no reaction so far, so it seems like unless something comes up later that she's just playing down her own emotion aspect on this, she hasn't figured out that it is not a test. This is a real maneuver. Again, it's why the Ender's Game theme at the beginning is really fitting.
We will hit their rear support from all sides and destroy them before their forward elements can finish off our holding fleets. Their leader instructed electronically. Though she could sense some reluctance to the tactic from Ally and Meek, they knew well enough not to voice them any further and to trust in Omega. As well they should, for she could see the big picture. She could see the whole board and the costs of their actions.
Oh.
There were none better at these kinds of puzzles than she.
Ooh, when she figures out what's going on, this line right here is going to become one of those, I could see the whole board minus the fact that it wasn't a board. Ooh. How to set up an imminent breakdown in a sentence. A super smart, competent character playing as aggressively as they can. Yeah. I don't know if this is something that happened to her in Clone Wars canon or Bad Batch canon, or if she was in any other events or shows. But at least here, I mean, the Ender's Game comparison is accurate. His character broke because of all of this. And, I mean, Speaker of the Dead was fine. Had issues, but it was fine. Some of the later ones kind of got annoying, and the prequel style and side character style were kind of boring. But we're about to see something similar happen, aren't we? And Fan just said, at least that's where Omega is in her training, since they are still trying to figure out what works and what does not work in these simulations, since the Imperium is a very new stratagem. And Barbarians RS, one awesome name too. Thank you for the donation. The dark side of the Force is compelling me to buy donuts. I'll watch the rest upon my return. Barbarian, you get all the donuts, man. Thank you. But also, that actually sounds really good right now. I wonder if I can bribe my wife into getting donuts after this. I'd say it's all according to cake, but in this case, it's all according to donuts.
And Omega had already sworn to herself that she would win this game, would save her friends and family, and then she would save the Republic as well.
And the best part, that earlier comment about that'll eliminate all of the, I think it was Mandator class. I'm hoping that's all that they have for the current strike force, not all that they have. One is a bigger number and way more damaging. Lord Admiral. Oh, we're on the other side now.
They splashed down into the suddenly advancing ocean of silver and red ships, smashing a few with their mere passage as they engaged.
Because in the last episode-ish, technically this episode, still on episode 40, whatever, her entire instruction was to ignore the ships that are smaller, focus on the bigger ones that could do more damage, ignoring the fact that this seems like the Star Wars side's advantage is actually on the smaller scale strike fighters, who are better but not actually able to do enough damage to the bigger ships yet.
With the others.
And
the shoals of small alien craft spun and swirled about her vessels. Toothy ships taking tiny bites out of the whales and sharks which comprised her fleet.
That does add up.
She gave orders to alter their attack patterns. But somehow, the enemy instantly reacted to any movement orders Rolla sent out. That kind of reactive ability could not be trained into flesh and blood alone. It required more, she knew.
More?
A connection, psychic, biological, or technological.
I mean, I know they have a Jedi. Is he running battle? No, but he's the only Jedi. They have multiple Jedi pilots. That's what I forgot. Yeah. I remember Plo Koon, but I thought for some reason he was the only one. But no, they had multiple Jedi pilots who could get in there and edge this up. So they have the battle mutation going. Okay.
Method of coordinating responses and sending out orders near instantaneously. And the dominating intelligence which was playing this battlefield against her was matching and countering the Lord Admiral's subtlest maneuvers like a strategist might easily play through a casual game of regicide. The battlefield had transformed in mere seconds after that.
Or is she not talking about the strike craft, but the main force? So it would be Omega she's talking about. Could be both.
Their arrival, the alien
because
offense going
was
from
taken
a
out at this
desperate
point.
bid to buy time to a troublesome tide of star-colored teeth. And then the initial clash was revealed for what it truly was. A farce. They had taken losses and feigned engagement only to speed past her ships, angling for her retreating ranged support. They had bluffed her, and she had fallen directly into their hands. She thought to order a reversal, but even now she could see they would be too slow to correct in time. The arcs of their returns too wide to prevent the battle moving straight into the face of her support units. Still, better to bring her might around and prevent a slaughter than idle with the few ships the Republic had left behind. And then, suddenly, the Lord Admiral watched her options dwindle and shrink as a second force of Republic reserves came about, outflanking her scattered fleet and firing into their sides and back. The forces she had present in the forward advance could crush these insects without significant losses, but only if she dedicated them to the task and left the support to fend for itself in the meantime.
And if there's one thing, anything that involves a long-term battle is that you don't want to lose your support ships, because everything else lives and dies on that. Or at least that would be more contemporary and I think Star Wars level thinking outside of the Imperium, where it's like big ship does everything. Contemporary naval theory is basically you have a very good ship at this and you have a bunch of other ships around it that make sure that everything the ship is not good at is covered by someone else. I think that's the Star Wars ethos right now, but I don't actually know enough about the naval tactics in 40K to say if that's something they would agree with or not, or if it would matter. Huh.
Meantime, Choosing to ignore the current enemy and turn back would almost certainly result in casualties to her forward assault fleet, which contained most of her battleships. The price of dignity shook and trembled around her as two more mandators fell into pursuit just behind, slamming her Oberon with fire from either side. And the third, which she had been dueling with, was not far behind and hot on their trail. Rolla's technologically assisted mind reeled as she kept track of her losses and projected losses. Her ships were sturdy, durable, they could take a lot of damage before being entirely destroyed. But, as it was, even they would begin to wither, either those of her forward rank or the smaller number which composed her ranged support. To make matters worse, the Republic had come in from behind them as well, falling upon the planet of Axum with what she could only assume were troop ships full of reinforcements they would use to crush flat their garrisons and survivors on the planet. This entire situation was turning into Grok's manure, and
on the one hand, nice backup. On the other hand, oh yeah, they're still going to blow up the planet, and there's more people going to die now. At what point does Tarweiler get his unintended victory by losing? Not because he managed to draw defeat from the jaws of victory, but because they actually lost. It's hard to see because I still think they might have dominance in orbit. But it doesn't sound like it's overwhelming right now. It's more like they're better, but also there's enough surprise that things could go badly if they make a mistake.
Over objectives she hardly thought worthy, no less. Had Orion Phaetris himself not insisted upon this plan of action, Rolla would have never given it a single serious consideration.
Ooh, what plan? Is it
and where is that space marine anyway?
Somewhere else.
She growled to herself, angrily tapping into her command chair, fingers clicking as she sent order adjustments out to her right flank as the Lord Admiral considered her next move.
Yeah.
The entire Skywatch escort fleet had launched into the Emittarium at the same time she had. Rolla was used to delays when dealing with warp travel.
They came together?
But if they did not arrive soon, then their arrival would cease to matter entirely.
That is interesting because there are no demons fucking around here. They can travel a whole lot faster and safer through the Emittarium or the warp equivalent right now than in their own universe. A delay. There are monsters in hyperspace, but other than just being aware that they exist as a fan of Star Wars, a fan with too much time hasn't really brought them up. Or is this an introduction of something interfering from that end? There already is the implication of demons possessing some of the clones down on the planet. But something is going on then that we're not aware of just yet, and this is the first indication.
Rolla's head began to pound in her steel skull. As Lord Admiral of the entire sector, such as it was, she had greater priorities than suicidal adherence to the orders of a single chapter master. She had to make her navy stretch. This could not be their last battle. Establish a direct link with the Admiralty. She hissed through clenched teeth, nostrils flaring. It's past time we leave this, she began to say. Lord Admiral, additional contacts, warp signatures are being registered, called the sensors officer. A smile lit the...
Oh, I don't know why, but I just got oh shit vibes. Probably for the exact same reason I just mentioned earlier. She got there earlier, something is fucking around with them, and there's very few things that could do that on the Star Wars side. So either something from the Imperium side is now having fun, or one of the big horrors on the Star Wars side is getting involved. My first thought is always Abeloth, but I think she's still contained at this point, so that wouldn't be a thing.
The man's cyborg face as he looked up at her to report. They are Astartes! The Adeptus Astartes! The Emperor's angels have arrived! Their ships are approaching at full burn. Arrival inside the combat zone is estimated at 7 minutes. He exclaimed in clear elation.
How far away did they jump
It's about time the Skywatch got here. she said with a heavy sigh, nearly
How fast are they
slumping
moving
into
for
her
7
chair.
minutes to be a thing?
Negative, ma'am. It's not the Skywatch.
What?
In fact, there are too many ships appearing to represent a single Astartes escort fleet.
What? The Skywatch, I thought, were the biggest group with the Imperium faction in this side. Unless I was completely understanding exactly what was going on. Who else could it be? Because if it's two, like if it was a different group, a different cluster, a different smaller chapter, but Fan only said the Skywatch were the biggest amount of Space Marines, not the one that had the most ships.
This looks more like...
The sensor's operator began to correct before the lights on the bridge flickered and died. They then quickly restarted, everything now lit in clear emerald green. A large, previously inert hololithic projector thunked into life
Damn.
and then flickered out its own grainy image, which gradually came into greater focus as it appeared before them.
What?
It had the likeness of a large, ornate sarcophagus, massive in size as it was displayed across the deck.
Sarcophagus?
A skeletal visage was carved ornately across the breadth of its green, light-forged surface. The skull
hologram.
which crowned it being lit from within, its eyes all too alive, despite the being's current resting place.
New spherical critical tactical link
Oh god, they're doing this voice again.
established.
Said a deep,
Oh, is it an Arc Mechanic?
thrumming
No, it's a
voice from the house.
No, I was going to say it's an Arc Mechanicus because it seems like someone on the Mechanicum side. But no, he's still doing... They still said it was Space Marine warships.
Howlers mounted onto the walls.
Greetings, Lord Admiral Rolla. I
Tempered
am
hand?
Sebastian Vondrell, Arch-Imbalancer of the Tempered Hands.
Imbalancer?
We have arrived to bring death in the Emperor's name.
Oh god, they're... Are they Necron fanboys? Maybe it's just because everything is doing a holo projection in green right now, and their thing is just a flat-out skull. And the modulated voice, but... How big was their chapter as a space unit?
And we have not come alone.
Said the chapter master of the steel-blooded
Oh.
Space Marines. Rolla stood right away,
Iron
a
Hand
hand
descending?
laying over her heart as she looked up at the massive image. I greet you, Arch-Imbalancer. Your aid
I have a
is
feeling he's
sorely
not going to
needed,
aid
and we
them.
have little time to waste. May I inquire as to whom you have brought with you? Asked the Lord Admiral, her burden visibly lightening as she spoke. In response, another 2 holograms were lit into the space.
So it's multiple of the
standing
smaller chapters
smaller
with
and to
them.
either side of the enormous projected coffin, one much larger than the other.
Wait, if they're talking about coffin... Also, Fan, you mentioned, why are we just going to give the skull symbolism to the Necron now? Mostly because they just kind of have a lot of... That's their general face, is metal skulls. Granted, it's also for the Mechanicum, it's also for the Imperium, it's also for... Basically just those 3 factions, actually, now that I think about it. And whatever the hell Chaos does, but they're just kind of like sitting on skulls. They don't usually use the skull as a motif itself. It's more a decoration.
The smaller of the 2 new arrivals bowed deeply, sweeping off a wide-brimmed hat and smiling with the
What?
deft charm of a rogue.
A Space Marine.
I am Lord Tiberius Clouseau of...
I'm sorry. You have a Space Marine named Clouseau with a big poofy hat. Oh my god, I didn't expect a joke character. He's probably incredibly competent because Fan doesn't usually write just solid jokes, but
Of a rogue.
they're just funny and then
I
other
am
things.
Lord Tiberius Clouseau of the Imperial Coalition of Sanctioned Tradesmen.
Oh, he's
and
probably a rogue trader.
Pathfinders. We and our 500 ships are here to do as the Emperor bids.
Unless he's also a Space Marine?
According to your dictates, of course. Lord Admiral Rolla.
Traitor. Okay.
Said the flamboyant trader, resting one hand on a heavy golden belt buckle while the other
Okay, that
lingered
makes a lot more
lightly on the
sense then.
handle of a thin
I thought it was literally just a space marine going super deviant. Oh, that actually would be funny in its own right. Theoretically, a space marine could become a rogue trader. It could theoretically happen. Hell, I wouldn't be even surprised if someone from the Death Watch figured they could do a better job as a rogue trader. But that would be completely different.
saber at his side. Oh, and am I to expect a fee for this aid? Lord Rolla asked, raising an eyebrow at the leader of the, thus far, troublesome impromptu guild which this man had managed to organize in the chaos of their long jump into this galaxy.
Wait, he had enough clout that he could actually arrange people to work together in short notice when they're actively fighting? The actively fighting part for the Imperium is the least troublesome there. Getting people to work together at all. Wow, that guy actually sounds way more as an actual important person. Huh.
You wound me, Admiral. Of course I am charging you nothing for this aid. I'd never even think of it, he said with a wave of his hand and a mocker's grin.
Is he looking for a panther?
After all, someone else has already paid for this little excursion in full.
Oh?
It would be disingenuous for me to charge you twice.
But donations of half of that were appreciated.
But if you feel so inclined, Lord Admiral, I will not stop you from donating to the cause.
And he actually asked!
He added, his smile slinking
Oh
wider.
my god.
Rolla sighed and turned to the other, who seemed to be waiting, studying their interaction like a spider might study a pair of new insects trapped in its web. Once she faced him, he bowed with an odd elegance, his many arms sweeping out, forming gestures and signs with every stilted yet smooth clockwork-like movement. He had 6 arms, all of them flesh, all of them protruding from 2 long sleeves.
Oh, this guy's a biologist, isn't he? The closest the Imperium gets to just flat-out Dark Eldar. Except for the Dark Eldar, who are canonically brought into the throne room to work on the Golden Throne. Because that is a thing that has been in canon for a while now.
One on either side of his thick red robes. His garments obscured everything about the rest of his body, save for the collection of lenses and sensor orifices that formed the shape of his insect-like face, which was visible protruding from the tightly packed hood of the priest's vestments.
Peace be between your soul and...
I have no... Oh, that was peace be? I said it said vis-a-vis. Okay. I'm just gonna leave this on for him.
Admiral of Sector Designation.
Oh, I heard sector.
Zectec. I and the Arch Mechanicus of the Forged Worlds have come to shape law from this disorder. Blessings be upon our holy machines who bear us fearlessly into the...
Okay, seriously, fan, why are you going so hard with the hive theme on this guy? I don't just... It's the buzzing voice. It's the buzzing voice.
maw of the
I hope he doesn't have many parts because I don't think I can understand anything he says long term.
War.
He droned in high binaural. Rolla smiled politely and interlocked her knuckles and fingers like the spokes of a gear, smoothly returning the high greeting to the master of machines, being more than well acquainted with the cult. In her time, Rolla had made many dealings with them and would not even hold her current position were it not for her relationship with the Forge Masters and Magos masses of the sector. Indeed, the gesture revealed that she was as close as any non-believer could come to the cult and not be destroyed for what they knew. I am honored to receive the aid of the machine gods faithful. You are most welcome on this battlefield, Archmagos Lesat Gamma, she said with a bow of her head, though she pointedly...
Wait, what did they say his name was? Oh my god, we have the LG. I'm assuming he makes overpriced Mechanicum stuff. Does he make monitors with really dumb names? Is his competitor Apple? Sorry, Alpha? At this point, I don't...
Archmagos Lesat Gamma, she said with a bow of her head, though she pointedly did not bend her back. The Mechanicus were rarely susceptible to flattery, at least not when it came in the form of a breach of protocol. The Magos seemed as well pleased as an inscrutable cyborg could be, returning the gesture with a nod of his own, clicking as he did. If I may be so bold, what has brought the church here? It is rare that you venture directly into imperial conflicts.
Church? I mean, I know that the Mechanicus is a religious order. Or is she replying that the church is the ship? Huh.
She said after a moment's thought. The private armies and navies of the Adeptus Mechanicus were among, if not the most, technologically advanced forces fielded by the whole of mankind. From legions of fanatical, highly advanced cyborg soldiers to fleets of bloated, almost alien battleships easily as opulent as anything the ecclesiarch may purchase,
and may or may not all contain AIs as they're hard running it in defiance of the fact that they actively hate the people who they're serving and or keeping alive. Granted, there's only been, I think, one story where it was mentioned that the heart of the Ark was actually a AI itself. Also, that they were all functioning STCs, but no one knew that because they only make it to order. They don't realize they're making SCTs and or already had them. I don't think it's been followed up on much, but it is a story that does stick to my mind.
And twice as heavily laden with ancient weapons and new, obscene devices. It was always a blessing when the Church of the Machine God deigned to join their Imperial brothers and sisters on the battlefield, until it came time for them to claim payment for their aid.
And they claim,
and unlike the greedy guild of rogue traders, it was rare that the Mechanicus was ever satisfied with the mundanity of currency.
The one bodies are material.
Chapter Master Orion Phaedrus has negotiated our intervention into this conflict in accordance with our agreement. We, the faithful of the Omnissiah, will hold the enemy armada.
I don't know why, but maybe it's just the word choice Fan is using, but he's actually easier to understand now than he was even a few seconds ago. Also, Marius Brandon, you mentioned the black hole guns. Actually, I was talking the one time the AI in an Arc Mechanicus got unleashed and decided to unfurl a gun that the Magoses running the ship didn't realize were a thing, and fired a temporal displacement gun, which overlapped a millisecond displaced temporal version of the ship they were firing at to overlap and spontaneously annihilate all matter in those locations. Because that was a thing they didn't even realize was on that gun, or that they had that gun, or that the AI in the ship could do that. Because it is heavily implied that there's a lot of AI in 40K that people just don't know, they're even ignoring.
In place for 1 hour.
The mostly machine creature elucidated. Rolla blinked in surprise, but before she could truly respond, Lord Clouseau coughed and interjected. Yes, since it does seem rather relevant, I should add that our dealings with the good chapter master are very much the same. 1 hour from the moment of our engagement with the enemy. After that, we are free to do as we wish, and to be frank with you,
what do they
dear
wish?
Lord Admiral, I and most of my fleet have no desire to continue a battle of attrition with these endless silver arrowheads.
Oh, no, they're talking about the spaceships, the Star Destroyers, rather than... For some reason, I thought they were talking about the individual clone troopers. It's like, I mean, I guess their ships, their heads are wide, arrowhead. It took me a second to switch over to space for some reason and think, oh yeah, Star Destroyer.
The rogue trader clarified. And I assume this is the same with you, Arch Imbalancer? She asked the enormous green
That could be an
coffin.
interesting question.
It is.
Oh,
Was the simple reply.
but not
She
to what
nodded
extent
tightly.
or how.
Then, can I assume that for the duration of that time, I am in command of our joint forces?
Would a space
She
marine allow
asked.
that?
It is so.
And he said.
Rumbled the entombed space marine.
Also, just to clarify, when they talk about how he's entombed, is he entombed in his armor and it's like mini dreadnought armor, or essentially what Terminator armor was initially built from? Or is it a flat out dreadnought? It sounds like a dreadnought, but I'm honestly not sure.
But of course, said the rogue trader.
The Omnisaya wills it.
Chanted
Well,
the
he definitely wills
machine
something.
priest.
Good. Then heed my orders. Arch Imbalancer, I will need you to take your fleet and contest the skies above Axum. We only have a limited amount
Wait,
of time
above
to
Axum?
evacuate our forces from the planet, and to accomplish that, we will need to clear enough airspace to move transports and drop.
She's retreating. This is not what I was expecting. Because as far as I know, the only person who knew they had to evacuate the planet was the guy who's about to blow it up. So, the Inquisitor. And I didn't think anyone else was... The only other person who knows they have to evacuate the planet would be someone who's got that information from, what's his name? Unless she made the decision on her own prerogative, that this is a losing battle they need to evacuate from just because they're losing more than they can replace, which is theoretically accurate in the sense that they don't have the facilities to replace anything at the moment, as opposed to Star Wars, which could take horrendous losses, but still has the entire galaxy to get those losses remade from. Huh. It really does depend. Is she working with the Inquisitor, or is she doing this on her own right? Because I'm not used to the idea of people not fighting to the death in 40k. Theoretically, it has to happen, but also, those people who would suggest that usually get killed way earlier on.
Craft through en masse. Contest them viciously, Chapter Master. We are on a time limit, and they are not.
She said.
By the Emperor and the martyred Father, it will be done.
Said the second oldest ranking space marine among the loyalists who had come with
Second.
the fleet.
Lord Clouseau, divide your ships between two categories
Wait, who's
as
the
best
first?
as you can manage. Those which are geared towards combat, and those which are geared towards hauling cargo. The former will rush to the enemy which is behind us and engage. Stop them from destroying our support while we mop up the ones we are dealing with now. The latter will go with the Arch Imbalancer and aid in the evacuation.
The Lord Admiral said, turning to face the flamboyant green hologram once more. He smiled and bowed again, though much more formally this time. Your wish is my command. He intoned.
I gotta ask, Van, how much fun did you have reading his lines? I swear, the level of schmarm you put into there is just... Oh, wow. Also, the reason I'm highlighting the idea that it's weird she's wanting to retreat, and people say in the comments, yeah, Kane runs away all the time, and yeah, but that's Kane. The rules of 40k for Kane specifically work differently in the sense that he could be in his position and not be an abject monster, as opposed to his own thoughts about his own self-worth, which would probably eventually, I'm a monster, but not quite literally. I'm wondering though, because if there was an entire admiral in his pocket on top of the commissar he's bringing in and all the other forces he probably has, how many other levers does he have to pull?
With a wing.
Also, when are we going back to Tatooine?
Archmagos, I require your fleet and forces to do two things. Firstly, begin engaging at range with the enemy armada. Do as little damage as possible to our own ships. Avoid crossfire at all costs, but do not close with them. Pick them off at range as much as is possible. I do not want to risk any serious damage to the arcs. You must act as my ranged fire support until the rogue traders can fight off the enemy attack, or until we can arrive to decide it. The Arc Mechanicus vessels are our only means of production and resupply in this galaxy. We cannot place them at great risk.
Yeah, so even though the Arc Mechanicus would be their greatest advantage because they're super ships, she made a good point there that they are the only source of resupply at the moment. That could be a problem. I'm actually wondering why they didn't just go onto Tatooine and drop down prefab factories to start building up their own Mechanicum segment. Probably because there's no resources worth stealing on Tatooine. They've had to have done it somewhere by this point, because not exploiting resource sounds more weird than anything else.
If the enemy seem to be closing with dangerous numbers upon your location, you are to retreat into the Immaterium. Hour expended or not.
She ordered the six-armed priest of the machine god.
We had already anticipated a 98.575% chance that this would be requested of us.
The fact that they believe there's a 0.5% chance she wouldn't do that indicates that there's a 0.5% chance that she's an idiot. I'm glad that's not the case. But also assuming there's someone in power in 40K who's an idiot is usually a smart move, because there's really only two types of people in 40K. Those who are incredibly competent and idiots. I'm including specific Primarchs in the idiot category. Not dumb. Idiots. Very different.
Therefore, amply prepared to engage the enemy as described. What is your second order, daughter of the flesh?
Clicked and buzzed the Archmagos.
They are using some kind of connection between their ships to instantly relay orders and commands. I want you to use the noosphere to breach and infiltrate the system as much as you can. Learn.
Because they were talking about Omega, not about Plo Koon's battle meditation. Got to keep remembering that. They're talking about big picture, not individual fighters.
Everything it lets you, and then take down as much of it as is possible by whatever means are available. We can greatly extend our longevity and effectiveness in this battle if we can at least impair this system they are using against us.
That's the part I don't get. Why are they talking as if they're losing? Because by all rights, it sounds like they're winning pretty handily. While everyone else is barely keeping up. They're barely keeping up. Although we haven't seen how effective that flanking maneuver was, so maybe that's the difference that happened.
Do you think this is possible?
The Lord Admiral asked.
It will be made possible,
Was the mechanical reply she received. Lord Admiral Rolla smiled.
Good. Then let us repay their cunning and trickery with ferocity and faith. I plan to use the entirety of the hour we have. Make ready to do the same.
Oh, we're going back to him. I actually forgot all about him. Is he still with the...
Finally, they had breached the walls, shattering and melting a hole into the interior of that towering impediment upon their assault. Using a combination of looted Imperial weapons and artifact armaments such as Combier's rifle, the rebels had focused fire on a single portion of the defensive structure.
Oh, so his rifle was
The
actually
walls had been erected in general haste and then reinforced, and against the many odd weapons that were brought against it, it only lasted a couple of minutes. But they were the bloodiest minutes of Combier's entire life. The Axumite had watched from behind his helmet as the men and aliens around him were mulched by turret fire, or seared and struck down by the scattering rain of varied munitions that the soldiers atop him within fired down at them.
Okay, one, really need to figure out what music he's using right here. That's pretty awesome. Two, it was pointed out in the comments by Shane Clark that there was only 7,000 ships total held by the Star Wars side in this battle. And I would say normally that's impressive, except it was heavily pointed out that in general, most of the ships on their own weren't all that impressive, and their real advantage was on the starfighter side. When they got to anything bigger, they kind of just didn't hold up, and the quality of the Imperium ships was overwhelming the quantity of the Star Wars side. That said, it's not so overwhelming that it's a wipeout battle, but unless the damage to allies done by the super weapon was bigger than I realized, which entirely could be a good reason for that.
For a few moments, the assault had seemed...
Oh, wait, no. Ripoff Productions attributed that to 900,000 ships. In this battle? Holy shit, that's a lot more than I expected. It's probably troops, not ships.
hopeless. Before, finally, the stone-like shell of the wall took one blast too many and crumpled inwards, exposing a passageway inside. Combier raised his voice in a primal battle cry as he and a horde of fellow, frenzied civilians charged into the breach, their wordless shout every bit the match of those roared back at them by the Imperial defenders who waited within. As the first mob of aliens and Axumites burst inside, the interior of the wall passageway was suddenly lit by a flood of flashing, glowing lasgun shots, muzzle fire from auto guns, and much worse. The volley slammed into the intruders from nearly all sides, scything the dissidents down in swathes. The losses they took were staggering, and Combier found himself being pitched and thrown by the force of the Imperial weapons, body covered in burns and bruises, and yet still alive nonetheless, even as he was borne down to the ground. Most of those around him were not so well protected and did not survive their charge into the mouth of the breach, the imps within having been well prepared with ranks of shock troops and heavy weapons.
How long ago did this come out? A year ago? Okay, I was going to say someone's played Helldivers recently, but no, this is just a little too old for that. Oh my god.
Even with Combier's protection, he was only moments from being torn to pieces or burnt into charred meat by the grinding, focused fire of the enemy lines. But he was saved once again as a spinning, dodging form ducked over and around the rending streams of fire. Bathrazan never ceased to amaze Combier, moving so smoothly and swiftly that it gave him chills just to watch. Despite holding only melee weapons, 2 lightsabers to be exact, he was easily a more lethal weapon than Combier's own rare rifle.
And this is what we saw earlier when he did breach. Wait, they're talking about making a breach now, so this is probably going back in time a bit when they ran into him earlier because he had the double lightsabers. Okay, yeah, so it's actually stepping back to something we already saw.
The man spun between luminous lines of laser fire and superheated bullets, shrugging off 2 or 3 shots that actually struck him before plunging into the enemy soldiers like a drill. Arms, legs, and heads of Imperial foes went flying, entrails and organs flung to either side of him as he tore through them with his own alien claws, as well as with the hungry, twin humming blades of his lightsabers. Combier staggered, but found hands all around him, helping him stand, pulling him to his feet, supported by the men and women who surrounded him. He felt a fervor, a need for battle and for revenge, but he was struggling to keep up with the obvious frenzy and odd coordination of those who were leading the charge.
Yeah, it's like they have a pseudo hive mind going. Like a swarm, even, of some kind of alien species. I have no idea what they could possibly be. Maybe you should check if he's still wearing the right kind of pants.
It was not every, or even most, of the rebels which exhibited this fatalistic need to push ahead, to grind the Imperials into gory paste beneath them. But it was enough for the mood to become an infectious cascade of violence which drove on and encouraged those others who were there to witness it. They struck him as an army of the possessed, but not in a bad...
Wow. Okay, fans, so you're just going right in there with an army of the possessed. Considering you literally already have that, you have the possessed clone army. Oh, I really hope they get involved here just because that line is such a good straight line to lead into it. But I think they're in a different location where the Bloodstorm was at. I'm assuming that's where they're located right now. I could be mistaken.
Bad way. They were fearless, laying down their lives so that the oppression of the Imperium could be ended. And seeing the unreasoning hatred pushing them forward into near certain death only made Combeer try harder. He pushed into a hallway as part of the mob which surrounded him, guns waving, voices crying out for blood. Bathrazan had cleared a space for them, and then cut his way out to the right, the enemy running before his blades. Many followed him, but not Combeer. He, and nearly half the group which had followed the champion into the wall interior, turned instead to the left, and just in time to run face first into Imperial reinforcements. As the riot around him screamed ahead, Combeer kicked and elbowed some space for himself and kneeled down, the long barrel of his weapon extending out as he gazed intently through the scope. Through it, he saw the charging rebels running face first into a trio of enormous armored men. Their heads were covered, save for one who bore his ugly, exaggerated face in a brutish scowl. They bore massive, thick shields and clubs as their weapons, the former appearing to effortlessly absorb the volleys of fire that came their way before they turned the shields to the side and began smashing with the latter. Literally.
Oh, he's talking about Ogrins. That's what he's talking about. Okay.
Pulping entire men flat with single swings
because
of the
they're
simple
individually
weapons.
strong as Space Marines.
Space Marines. Combeer growled, half in fear, half in sudden excitement and anticipation. Despite their formidable reputations, these big brutish angels of the Emperor did not seem to be caring too much for anything beyond hammering mindlessly away at the rebels.
And he's incorrectly assuming the Ogrins are Space Marines. Because a Space Marine would not actually do a lot. Some of the Space Marines we've seen in combat so far are not the type to get sidetracked by going full on, pounding the enemy away with their melee weapon type things. There are plenty of chapters that actually would be a thing, so I can't say it wouldn't happen.
The mind-addled genetic experiments of the Imperium kept up their thoughtless, tactless attack, thinking too much of killing and not enough of using their shields to hide from the additional incoming fire they were receiving, like what Combeer sent their way a moment later. His gun barked loudly, a spiraling disruptor spike suddenly discharging from its barrel and hurtling into the exposed collarbone of one of the club-bearing giants. His entire chest collapsed, throwing the man-thing back off its feet and creating a gap in the barrier it had been forming with the two others of its kind. It had barely landed flat on its back before the hole in its chest began to widen, disintegrating most of its neck and torso before the effect halted. Combeer lowered his gun and punched his fist.
Is it bad that I'm just kind of wondering, not so much here, but in actual 40k canon, if it's ever going to come out that Ogrins actually were an early attempt at just growing Space Marines naturally, or were the reason why Space Marines had to be made the way they are rather than bred? I just would find it funny if the breed of Space Marine actually turned out to be Ogrin. Is that a smart move? No, it would be stupid, but it would make it really funny for me.
Death to the Emperor! He yelled, the aliens and humans around him roaring with him. Death to the
Oh my god, that has to be one of the most nostalgic things the Imperium side could hear right now. Which one of them is... If there's a single Blood Angel in there anywhere, and he's just like, Horus! I doubt that would happen, but it would be funny.
Emperor! Death to the Emperor! They echoed, swarming around the two other monsters of the Empire and pulling them down, destroying them under the weight of their numbers. But their numbers were starting to thin. Something Combeer could not help but notice as those ahead of him continued forward and less from behind him were able to follow. Getting this far had proven to be a bloody grind, an achievement born on unthinkable amounts of sacrifice. But they were not about to back down, not now that they had made it this far. He looked down to check his ammunition count. 3 shots remained. He grimaced, but only clutched his weapon more tightly. As far as he was concerned, this only meant that he had to make these last few shots count, With that thought in mind, the Axumite heir pressed ahead, following after those who had come before him and turning a bend. There, he could exit out of the wall, the natural one, the one that led into the rest of the Imperial base. But it was not unbarred. Standing within the entranceway, already engaged in battle with the rebels who had come with him, were 5 figures, dancing and cavorting despite their bulky armored bodies.
I'm assuming... Wait. Bulky armored bodies cavorting. Not the... I'm trying to guess who Fan is describing before he puts it out. I know if I just go 5 more seconds, I hear it, but I actually want to see if I can figure this out. Bulky armored bodies cavorting. Probably the sisters, but their armor's not really bulky. Maybe it's a tactical warsuit sister?
The screaming fanatics of the Emperor, dressed in their powered armor and hefting sparking mauls and swords. He kneeled again and began to take aim before he was suddenly sighted by one of the Imperial sisters. She barked an insult in their Gothic language at him and snapped out her free hand. A hand which he realized was not free, but holding a pistol of some kind. The smaller weapon roared with the force of something far greater than its size implied, making Combeer jerk and then throw himself across the floor, barely evading the 3 shots she snapped off at him. His heart beat in his ears as he scrabbled for the cover created by a heaped pile of stinking bodies, breathing hard all the while. He turned to peek out, only to feel his blood run cold from what he saw. The last 9 rebels were being hacked apart before his eyes, and once they lay dying upon the gore-slicked ground, the glowing owl eyes of the sisters turned upon him. He cried out, ducking and covering his head with both hands as they riddled the pile of bodies he was hiding behind with explosive bullets, blowing most of the obstructing flesh away and knocking him painfully forward. 2 gaping rents were left in the back of his armor, the wounds there bruised and bleeding badly.
But the armor did its job, so... God, this kid is just lucky as fuck.
Though he only barely felt their pain, at least for now.
Partially adrenaline,
Gasping
partially
and
nerve
out of
damage.
Breath, his lungs flattened by the impacts, Combeer crawled forward and rolled onto his back, aiming his gun up and firing it blindly, his 3rd shot sailing over their heads. The sisters did not even blink or flinch, raising their horrific hand cannons and shooting a volley directly into the prone, dazed rebel. Combeer flinched before the impacts reached his body, but found nothing struck him, and when he opened his eyes, he saw why, though remained confused by it nonetheless.
What?
The bolts they had fired were hovering in the air between he and they, held back by some invisible force.
Is he doing this, or is Genova behind him?
Even as they burned and spun in place, their micro rockets firing hot and hard, but getting nowhere. The answer to his confusion came a moment later, Javona revealing her...
Javona, that's what it is. I'm going to just keep calling her Genova, because at some point someone's going to go, Mother, in the creepy way possible. I'm just assuming it's going to happen now.
As she strode past him, eyes luminous with power as she held the attack back, and then reflected the explosions which followed.
Psychers, man.
Spat one of the...
What? Monstrum? Oh, yeah, it's the pseudo-Latin Imperium dialect.
Imperials.
Accurate.
Another as they all raised their various close-ranged combat weapons and began to charge. Javona bellowed back, her voice deep and resonating with unnatural power. She punctuated the words by swinging her arms widely and clapping her hands loudly before herself. The clap created more than sound, however, the gesture unleashing a rolling wave of telekinetic might. This blast met with and overcame the charge of the 5 sisters, tossing the remaining shots they fired as they ran into different directions, none of them near her or Combeer. The Imperial fanatics howled in fury, fear, and pain as they were caught in the hurricane of power she had expelled in their direction. Their armored bodies were thrown back,
flung into the ceiling, the floor, and each other before finally being ejected from the passageway.
Oh shit,
Their
she actually
impacts
knocked
around
them
and
out.
against the exit
Like not
provided
even just a
sufficient
little out, like out of the entire area. I mean, for a psyker, that's low bar, but at the same time, it's still people who are armored and able to kill you.
force to dislodge the entire entrance wall, blowing it away with them and leaving the exitway a
Damn.
gaping hole within the
Okay, a little more
interior
power.
facing side of the Imperial wall. Givona smiled at the effect, clearly delighting in her power, before sagging and resting her hands on her knees. She was still
Little too
smiling,
much draw?
however, until she turned and spotted Combeer, who was obviously wounded. Givona ran over to her chosen companion, taking his hand while coming down to her knees, kneeling beside him. Her eyes were full of concern,
Is this where he gets
genuine
infected?
and frantic, and it warmed him to see it, making him grateful for the helmet which covered the boyish blush on his face. "I'm all right. Just took some bad hits, but the armor ate most of it," he said to her. "You should not be doing this," she said with
Oh, a
no
lot
small
of people
amount
shouldn't
of
be doing
urgency.
a lot of things, like you
You
living.
have fought enough. You can leave this to... She began to say, cut off as a shadow passed over them and spoke the words for her.
Me.
Said Bathrazan. He and several more rebels striding past and kneeling too, all obviously eager for battle, and yet seeming fresher and less worn down than Combeer would have thought.
So is this happening after the first time he was in there? Or is this right before that fight happened?
The big alien man eyed them carefully before moving on, and Givona smiled sardonically but nodded as he left. "Exactly," she said, looking back down at Combeer. The Axumite grinned back up at her, and then groaned as he began to sit. "Be careful. That armor does not make you invulnerable," she scolded, sliding under his arm to
slightly
help
less
take some of his
imminently
weight.
deadable.
He grimaced and winced,
It's just
feeling
mostly
the
deadable.
beating he had taken, small pieces of metal embedded deep into the 2 bleeding wounds he now bore. "Don't I
Ooh, yeah, that sounds like a don't pull it out situation.
know it? I don't suppose you have any Bacta on you? Any breathers?" he asked,
Yeah,
but
they wouldn't
she
have
bit
any
her
of that.
lip and shook her head. But no sooner had she answered than a Bacta rebreather was dropped right into Combeer's lap, another shadow falling over the 2
Oh?
as several more rebels rushed past them.
Normal rebels
"Down
or
with the Empire!" yelled one. "Death to the Emperor!" screamed another.
the first one sounds like the surfer dude. The second one definitely more Tyranid based.
But not the one who cast the new shadow.
What?
This one pausing beside them, drawing out a smelly stick of wrapped weeds, and placing it between 2 lips as a lighter flicked open, and flame lit the end. Combeer looked up and felt his eyes grow wide. A
Wait, what?
lit the end. Combeer looked up and felt his eyes grow wide, a smile spreading over his features as recognition hit him.
And Samael jumping in with the death of the Emperor, man, dude, yeah. Oh my god, I don't even. The irony of an Inquisitor saying that. You know, considering how some of the Inquisitors seem to go, that actually probably happens more often than not.
"Samael, it's you!" Combeer said, yanking his own helmet off to reveal a sweaty but relieved face. Givona twisted around, eyes narrowing right
First
away.
time meeting, yeah.
But the sight of Combeer's relief and the medicine he had received were assurance enough to keep her from being too alarmed.
Admittedly, just the Bacta in general, if they came back with just how to do that alone, it would make this probably one of the most profitable endeavors for the Imperium of Man in most of their history, with admittedly small for them losses. Because Bacta is really fucking good at what it does. The flesh is weak, but flesh with Bacta holds up pretty damn well.
But the man had an aura on him, a menace she felt was familiar yet unrecognized. He was almost as large as
my target.
Bathrazan, thick muscles pushing against his green work clothes and the long dark coat he wore over them. He stood like Bathrazan as well, slightly up on the balls of his feet, his hands
Easier to
free of
move.
obvious weapons and yet thick with the scent of blood, something Givona could sense more than actually smell.
The newcomer did not respond right away to Combier's words, taking a long drag on his low stick and then breathing it out slowly. When he was done, he opened his eyes, the center of each one akin to twin round flakes of obsidian glass, glistening intensely but black as pitch.
Hey again, kid,
said the looming man, lowering his large, scarred hands, sliding them into the deep pockets of his black jacket. His eyes found Javona's in place of Combier's, glinting, smoldering darkly, his lips quirking ever so slightly.
Because he just found his prey, or one of his prey. Yeah. That's probably the equivalent to him of, haha, got him.
Before his sight slid up to Combier's beaming face, the subtleties of his former expression bleaching away, replaced with the barest hint of melancholy. He stood silent for a moment longer than was comfortable.
Because this is where he's probably going to kill Combier. Because he's an inquisitor at the end of the day.
Holding the low stick between his teeth, the white smoke snaking out from its tip drifting into the air and sliding between them, slightly obscuring his gaze. I wasn't sure you'd even know how to get here. It's good to see you again. Combier stuttered out awkwardly.
Samael drew hard on his low stick again, the end lighting bright orange and traveling an impressive distance up its length before it stopped. He puffed out a cloud of smoke and spat what remained of the weed onto the ground and stomped on it once. I was always gonna follow this to its heart, kid. But if I'm honest, I was hoping not to see you here again. But you know what they say.
Yeah, he's definitely about to kill Combier.
He said, black, almost doll-like eyes shimmering oddly as he sighed and shook his head.
To heck with
Hope is the first step on the road to disappointment.
Yep. You're cutting it there! You did. Yeah. You know, just for that, I'm changing the name of this. Just changing the name. Hope is the first step on the road to disappointment. Yeah, I've done that. That is my punishment. I'm just leaving it in there because I got my hopes up that something would happen. No, you're just dropping in Samael to immediately be written off because the episode ends. I could keep going, but also I need to get out because I did tell my wife I'm going to be streaming for another 6 hours like yesterday. Yeah, I did not realize it was 6 hours. I thought I was at maybe 2.5. I was wrong. I mean, dear freaking just. And Fan is in the chat going, yeah, laugh it up, fuzzball. Because it's a Star Wars reference. I just. Yeah. Sonic Halo, do I have time for more? Unfortunately, not today because I may or may not have eaten up my wife's patience by taking an hour or like 4 hours longer to stream yesterday than I expected, and I need to make up for that. So next week, we'll start on the next one, which I think is the first episode of 41. That is a very weird sentence that I just said. But you guys get it at this point. Either way, if you haven't already, there's a link below to the original video. Fan did a great job. My minor nitpicking about grammar aside, everything here was really well done. Fan did a great job, especially showing intelligent characters and getting a bit of Samael right at the end, but also just that goddamn cliffhanger. I shouldn't be surprised. I really shouldn't. But I still am. Yeah. On that note, I'm not late for once, but also I need to immediately go because I need to make it up to my wife. All the same. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you guys next week. And Fan, just thanks for making this, man. This is something I really look forward to checking out more of every week. And I may or may not be stretching it out because I kind of don't want to run out and I'm getting closer to the end and I hate that. Your writing is good. And if you ever happen to do sci-fi on your own, let me know because I would like to buy a hard copy book of it. I know you made a comic, but I don't know if there would be a hard copy of that yet because I'm not sure how fast that's being put out. Either way, I'll see you guys later. Adios.